Hello and welcome to the first episode of the As Yet Unnamed podcast. I'm Gerad, and this podcast will be going through Devils history as seen by two long stalwarts of the Cardiff Devils in different guises. First guest tonight is a legend of the Cardiff Devils ice hockey team, whether it be as a player, as a coach, or as any other job that the club entails. Mr. Neil Francis. Neil, thank you very much for joining us.
I thought you were talking about John there. And I just giving away the second guest.
Yeah. And of course, to the side of me is Mr. John Donovan. John, you are one of the first Cardiff Devils season ticket holders.
Yeah, there's a story my dad likes telling. He was the first ever season ticket holder, and the club's been stuck with me for the last 30 odd years.
So between the two of you, there's nothing you haven't seen, and there's no nook or cranny that we can't get into.
The difference is John remembers it all, and it all merges into one season for me. But.
Well, I was sober most of the time, right?
Fair point.
Water bottles.
Yeah.
So the theme of the podcast will be this. Each week we will go through a different topic directly related to Neil Francis' career. So that can be a single season, that can maybe be a competition, a playoff run, maybe a particular player that we'll go in depth on. And each week we'll kind of go through it chronologically, and we'll see if we can unfurl some of those rumours that went around the rink way back when, and maybe get a little insight into the big moments of Devils history. And today will be a particularly big season in Cardiff Devils history, one full of joy and heartbreak and everything in between.
Can I just say, guys, sorry to interrupt, Franny's cheating, he's got elite prospects. I'm doing this from memory, so...
Well, no, everything I've done involves elite prospects, so I just thought I'd continue with that.
Sorry.
His own CV.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Sorry.
But it will be the world record breaking season, 10-11. And hey, let's get right into it, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
Neil, to start with you. The off-season, what did you and Gerad want to change about the team from the previous year?
I think the first place we started out was getting back to having that dominant first line. I think the year before was the second year of the forward, Mark Smith.
Yes.
Yeah, when it didn't work out so well. So the first time round we had him, and probably best player in the league.
Yeah.
I remember we went out, pushed the boat out to get him back for the second time round. We were really excited to get him, and I think it's fair to say his head was elsewhere, and we didn't see the same player. He was a patch of the player, so it was almost to get back and strengthen that top line. And I remember one guy that I was really keen on for that role was Ed McGrain, that ended up in Braehead for a year.
Yeah.
He'd been playing in the Central League. He was putting up 90 odd points a year, and I thought that he could really come in and and do that great job. I mean, he wanted a lot of money to come in, and at that time I remember I was away with work, and G got a phone call, and it was through Stevie Lyle connection, to say, you just take a look at this guy. This is the one that Stevie's bringing to the table now. A connection of his from Morzine had put him our way, and when you look up the resume of Scott Matska and seen everything that he did in Denmark, and I think that the previous year to us he'd played in the Finnish second league with a few call-ups to the SM Liga, the elite league there. And at the time that was a huge deal, and to even be in with a sniff of getting that guy was exciting. And then obviously we got that job done. So
how do you sell it to a guy like Matska? Just sorry to interject, right? Because we're not talking about the glossy arena that we've got now and laden with trophies and what have you. You're talking about a tent and a team that had punched above his weight but hadn't won anything of significance for some time. How did you and G go to Matska and sell the Cardiff project?
Well, we didn't talk about the tent.
Okay.
That's a rival, yeah. No, I think that, to be honest, the reason we got Matska was the NBA. Mm-hmm. So we had, I think, 4 spots on the NBA that year, and that was his focus. We know Matska's an extremely smart guy, and very, level-headed, and he knew that after hockey, a career was important to him. So he, it was the NBA, and Stevie was the one liaised in directly with Matska, to be fair, and the town has always been a really good sell. You can Google Cardiff and see all the amazing things that we've got on our doorstep. So that that's a big thing, especially with a guy with family, an English-speaking country, all that kind of thing. So I'd say ultimately, though, the NBA was what got Scott Matska here.
He didn't turn out too bad.
Oh no, I think it all worked out pretty well in the end. One player I want to touch on from the previous season that we lost, which I think, in my mind as a fan at the time, you would really wanted to keep hold of. Wes Jarvis, someone who was really big and kind of grew into that role over the couple of years he was there. Was there any talk about keeping him going into that season, or was it pretty much he made his mind up that he was...
Oh, we definitely wanted to keep him. We loved Jarvie. I think early on he had quite a bit of criticism when he was sort of trying to find his role on the team, but when it clicked, he was really impressive. He had that amazing size, big shot from the point, effective on the power play, and a genuine all-round nice guy. And when he did have his little mean streak, as I think it was Andrew Sharp or whoever found out, that was impressive too. So I think we'd have kept Wes Jarvis every day of the week, but I think he'd already made that decision to move on.
In this off-season, another big talking point, and throughout the time we're going to look throughout this season, the fates of Cardiff and Sheffield are intertwined on and off the ice. And in the off-season, John, I'll come to you first on this. There's a big mass walkout against the then owner Bob Phillips. Michael Connor, David Sims and Dave Matsos all leave the club. It causes quite a stir, especially for Simsy to pack it in. I was surprised with you at the time that all this sort of unfurled out of nowhere seemingly.
I think probably at that time in British ice hockey, you weren't surprised by anything in British ice hockey. I think we've sort of in 2018 now, where things seem reasonably stable. You forget how much was going on back then, even with a club like Sheffield, which was probably the most storied franchise going. And when Dave Sims walked out of the Sheffield Steelers, something must be bad there, because I'd probably leave my wife quicker than he'd leave the Sheffield Steelers. But from sort of adversity, positive things come. They brought in Ben Simon, and probably most importantly for me, they got Ben Simon the coach, and he was certainly a good coach, but they got Ben Simon the player, who I thought was a quality player, and really someone who galvanised that team and could be a role player and put the team on his back a little bit and lead by example, as we've seen so many people do in Cardiff. So it's always the lesson in that you don't write the Steelers off, and in that off season maybe people were starting to write them off and say the instability will cost them, and they still put a quality team on the ice.
I'll just read the quote from Simsy in the BBC piece at the time. "I would call for the fans to stay calm and see where the events lead in the next week. But I hope they'll be able to see that none of us have walked out on the Sheffield Steelers. However, there is no way any of us continue to work in the present environment."
Yeah.
That's where we find the Sheffield Steelers. Very different situation than Cardiff. Franny, Cardiff was a pretty quiet off-season by previous standards. Everything seemed pretty settled, and the task at hand, we were all ready to go for the season.
Yeah, I mean that Sheffield story there, which you reminded me of, I've forgotten totally about that, but it just does show you that there's come times in Cardiff as well where the most passionate of us have had to make moves that we didn't like to do, and fair play to them for sticking by their guns for to find a way to improve the club. And I think ultimately that did happen later down the line, because there's obviously things that weren't right there that they needed to fix.
Guys, can I ask Franny about just to cross over the two subjects of Cardiff team building and Sheffield? One of the guys I'm always interested in, because I don't think he gets enough love, and whatever you think of him as a coach, Ryan Finnerty came back that year, and he came back as captain. And I think all three of us around this table, I'm a huge fan of Ryan Finnerty, particularly Ryan Finnerty, the player, what he did, the big goals he'd score. how he would ruffle feathers and get involved in conflict if he needed to. What did he bring to the team that year? And I guess, bearing in mind he was following in the footsteps of Brad Voth, Brad was still a big part of the team, but what did Ryan bring as captain?
I think the best quality that Finna had, I mean, great hockey player, really good all-round player. The best quality that he brought, and you know, sometimes I feel myself crying out for a player like Ryan Finnerty, is when the chips were down, he would be the one to go outside of the box, outside the comfort zone, and make something happen. You know, it might be a little cheeky, dirty play or something like that. He'd done it for years against us. You know, when we were on top against Sheffield, then he would do something off the play, he would draw a reaction from us, we'd get the penalty, they'd score on the power play, and very crafty player who wasn't afraid to step up. Well, you know, he on multiple times he stepped up when the team needed it. I remember him one time we were up against Hull, and Joseph Sladdock, who's, you know, 6'4", 6'5" guy who does a bit of MMA fighting. And you know, we needed a spark, and Finn was like, "Okay, I got this," and you know, and jumps up, and you know, he's really tough actually, Finna, and you know, he knew how to get under people's skin and to get a reaction at the right time to get his team going.
Absolutely.
So let's get into it. It's a season remembered for a long winning streak, but it actually starts with a bit of a bump. And challenge games aside, the first 3 league games are losses. There's a 5-1 loss on opening night in the Sheffield Arena. There is then a 4-3 loss at home against the Belfast Giants, and that is followed the following week by a 5-4 loss in the MIC in Nottingham.
And it's probably closely followed by a statement to say this is the worst Cardiff Devils team I've ever seen.
Yeah. But I did apologise for that.
Oh, so there we go. How difficult is it to knit so many new players in such a short space of time? Because back then there wasn't the long training camps that you see these days. I imagine the players were coming in late August around this time, and playing straight away sort of the next week.
Right up until the sort of new ownership we had, players coming in on the Saturday, Sunday of that bank holiday weekend, the August bank holiday weekend. Monday and Tuesday would be practices. Wednesday was probably a challenge game. Get back out there. 2 challenge games on the weekend. Repeat for the week after, and there you go into Challenge Cup and league action. So you had next to zero time to get together and gel. It is hard, but sometimes also it throws people into the deep end, and you get some chemistry forming naturally, and it's amazing when that happens. And the one quite impressive thing I think about this team is the guys that were recruited as the first line, second line, third line stayed in those positions for the entire year, which is it's pretty big. But I think it took I remember Matska coming in, and he'd been in Finland, used to playing 4-line hockey, and all of a sudden here he was playing 3-line hockey plus every shift of power play plus every shift of penalty kill, and that guy plays intense as well, and I think that was an adjustment for him. Pals, I remember seeing Pals in challenge games, and I'm thinking, oh god, this guy is way too small for this league. Sorry, Pals. And it goes back to in that summer when G brings the name, he gets the name John Palais that the agent thinks is a rough diamond and could do special things, and look him up, and he looked okay, Central League, okay stats. Rapid City just won the CHL Championship, Memorial Cup, it's whatever it is. CHL Championship.
One of those.
He looked okay, and I was really keen on this other winger. Bit of a bigger guy, had a probably better goal scoring record, weirdly, because Pals was quite sort of stretched out between goals and assists in an even way, and this guy is a bit more, and I was dead keen on him. And then there was a couple of sort of last minute requests from Pals in terms of renegotiating his contract, and when we thought it agreed, and I was like, gee, let's just cut him off. Come on, we got this other guy ready to go. Let's just cut this guy off. I think he's going to be trouble, you know. And you know, luckily G said no. I've got a good feeling about him, and you know that couldn't have turned out to be any better feeling really, because Pals. Not only did he turn into the best goal scorer in the league, you know, G came in and challenged him and said, "You're going to be my goal scorer, so forget what you've done before, you're my goal scorer." But, you know, an absolute super nice guy to go with it, and, you know, not like anything that I was maybe expecting. And then, you know, the chemistry that he built up with Matska and Max.
I was going to say, past October, did you bother running power play drills, or did you say, John, go to the back door?
Yeah, and then, you know, in the great night that we had before the match when the guys were up on the stage, you know, telling stories, and you know, Matska's quick to point out that, you know, Pals, he just had to sort of stand there with his stick on the ice, and he'd get it on there, and you know, we can't forget about Max Beerbreyer as well. What an important part of that line he was as well, and it almost was the perfect chemistry of a line. You got Max as the big hitting winger, you know. Great skills on him too. He can shoot, he can pass. Matt's an absolute workhorse, both ends of the ice. You know, he is the prototypical two-way centre. And then you got Pals, just one of those guys with a natural gift that wherever he stands, the puck seems to end up on his stick. And you know, at first you think it's a bit of a fluke, and then when it happens time after time after time, you realise no, that's a gift. And you know, what a threesome we had there.
Yeah.
So after the first 3 losses, there's then an unbeaten run of 6 games. That's 4 wins and 2 draws, Challenge Cup games, where the draws come from. And then that is closely at the end of that run, that last draw, in that run of 6, there's a game in Hull where Justin Sawyer, who started the season in defence, he sucker punches a member of the Hull Stingrays, and he is suspended. I'd just like to read a quote from Shannon Hope in the local press after the charge was brought against Sawyer of the sucker punch. I'd have done the same.
And so he would have.
We completely support him.
I can give you about 6 examples of Shannon did that.
I mean, if you're in the dock,
and
Shannon Hope was the one defending you saying, I'd have done the same.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably just plead guilty, wouldn't you? And you'd say, you know, that's enough of that. I'll pay my suspension. I'll pay the fine. Thank you very much, Elite League.
I remember the incident, and there was Hull had driven to the net excessively, you know, right, you know, on Stevie's toes. One guy had gone in there and given him a bump, and I think Sawyer had given him a shove, and then the D-man, who's like a Russian D-man or something, comes flying in from the blue line, and Sawyer turns round and pops him one. And I remember not being that happy about the suspension at the time, not from Sawyer's point of view, but from the league point of view, because, you know, this guy has come in physically looking for an altercation, and
he's found one.
Yeah, either Sawyer waits and he takes one, or he's proactive and he gives one. And you know, we felt though, okay, he gets thrown out of the game on the night. Okay, fine. It then gets reviewed and it gets upgraded to a match suspension. And we just thought it's a bit hard from somebody that's come into an altercation as the sort of instigator on the back of sort of bumping the goalie and stuff like that. You know, what are you going to expect when you're running in and you got a 6'6" D-man in front of you? Almost you'd be mad if he didn't do anything. You know,
Sawyer's often forgotten about because of Gaz is going to go on to this, the guy that replaced him, and obviously we'll talk about that. But Sawyer, before he left, was doing a job for the Devils. I seem to remember he was a good, powerful D-man. He could play minutes. He was reasonably mobile. Yeah. You know, Justin Sawyer was someone who could have been a Cardiff Devil going forward.
I think he could have, yeah. And you know, it was. He surprised us when we came into, you know, he's obviously in North America been pigeonholed into the fighter role, which he could do very well. When you come over here, you've got to do more than that to, you know, to justify his spot. And he was a very, very solid player. He did what, you know, everyone wants you to do and clear the crease in front of the goalie. He could make a good pass. He could contribute well. And, you know, in one of his last games, I think he came flying out the penalty box in Coventry and tucks away a breakaway goal for his one and only Cardiff Devil goal. But
remember it, don't we?
We do, yeah. So yeah, he would have been someone we definitely wouldn't have actively looked to change. And then he had to go home, unforeseen circumstances. He ended up going home, and we were stuck without a D-man. And I remember we had an injury at the time, and I think going on to start that run, we were playing 5, maybe even 4D, and the second line D pairing was G and Alex Simmons. And we played, I think, before we ended up with the very famous now Craig Weller in what we refer to as the Craig Weller year. I think we'd already gone 5 or so games into our run with G and Simo playing as second D pairing and soaking up a lot of minutes. So Simo, a young guy that was just doing everything right, playing very solid, being so dependable out there. G, the wise.
This is the thing about G though, isn't it? Because again, everyone remembers him now as Cardiff Devils coach. G was an exceptional player as a defenseman who could play forward, but guy who could clear the net again, take a fight, score important goals. So forget about Gerad Adams, the coach, for a second. Gerad Adams was a very good player.
But what's also, I think, lost in that is he only became head coach when he was 28.
Yeah.
So these kind of prime defenseman years, he was coach as well. So I think that plays into it. And big part. I always loved G as a player and as a coach.
G as the player is definitely somebody that you wanted on your side. You knew that he would keep it very simple. He'd do all the basics right. Nasty streak to him to play against, so he always had people with one eye over their shoulder, would step up when he had to, and I think that's a prime example of where G takes Simo under his wing there as the senior D-man, gives Simo the confidence and to play there, and Simo played a hell of a role in getting that run going, and even when we did get back up to strength, then playing as probably a fifth or sixth D-man that year. As a young guy.
Yeah. As a little sidebar around this time, just a little tidbit for this season, that game in Hull with the sucker punch, Matska was actually picked up at I believe Doncaster Airport because he had played in the game with the Belfast Select against the Boston Bruins. I think he scored as well.
He did,
He got the goal for the Elite League Select. You as a coach at the time, any hesitation to release players for a game like that?
No, never. I think that is a once in a lifetime opportunity to suit up against one of the best teams in the world, and you'd never want to deny a player that. In a similar way that Steve King talked about recently, that last year we were approached about Tyson Strachan playing for Team Canada in the Spengler Cup, and we said absolutely, if you want him, even though that we're in a title run and he's so important to us, he's yours, because we wouldn't deny a player that opportunity. And Steve actively pushed Joey Martin into the equation as well, and said, look, you want to take a look at this guy? He can play at that level. So I think that's one thing that we've always tried to do. G is a very honourable man, and I don't think there was ever a question that we would stop Matska playing in a game that that's so monumental. But not ideal that he misses practice and we pick him up at the airport. But
I don't know who organised that Belfast Boston game, but he's got a future in hockey.
He'll do okay.
We should sign him up.
Great arrives. Franny, take us inside the kind of war room when you're looking for a replacement, especially mid-season. What's the ambition for a club like the Devils at the time? Because Weller was not far removed from the NHL. If you sign a player like that these days, I think less eyebrows are raised, given the standard around the league. But at the time, and for the time of year that he signed, this is a real big statement. A lot of the noise at the time was that it maybe wouldn't be for the full year. It was maybe just a shop window type deal. Talk us into it. When did you realise that you were able to get a player of the calibre of Weller, and were you expecting it to be a long-term signing when it was made?
We've been looking for a player. I'm not sure. I think it was 3 weeks that we'd lost Sawyer for 5 or 6 games, and we had non-stop been looking for a player, exhausting every avenue we could, looking under every rock we could, all our usual suspect agents. Nothing was coming back, not even not even a guy to tide us over, or a guy that we thought he'll be okay and let's see how he goes. Literally nothing. We were almost getting desperate because we felt that we definitely needed that. We were down to bare bones at the back end there anyway. And I remember sending out an email to literally as many agents as I could find contact details for. Just send out there, say, look, we need a D-man. We're ready to go right now. Have you got anybody? Needs to be able to make an impact for us. And I'm not sure if one of those games you got the fixtures there, but I'm sure you're up in Dundee. If it's rightly, 28th of October, and we finished the game, and I go on the bus waiting for the guys to get changed and everything, and I look at my emails on my phone, and an agent that we've never dealt with before and we've never dealt with since, no matter how hard I've tried, said, yeah, I got Craig Weller. So, looking him up on Elite Prospects, and I'm like, seriously? Has he got Craig Weller? Because a lot of the time you get sent names from agents and, it's pie in the sky and, they don't really represent them and, it ends up in a bit of a wild goose chase. And, I look at the name, I look at the CV and 95 games in the NHL and countless others in the AHL and I think 4 or 5 straight years in Hartford, AHL, as well as captain, and I'm like, oh my god. And then you look at his YouTube and Drop Your Gloves, and you see the fights against Tolef's son, I think, where he nails him once and then drops somebody else and drops somebody, and it was just like, oh my god, this is just the dream now. It's obviously not going to come up, but went straight back to the guy. Pretty much, we'll have him, how much? And, he wasn't looking for a lot of money. He was sitting, we were like, what's the situation? And, he was sitting at home, waiting for the deal to come along that never did in the AHL. He was still playing. There was a bunch of guys in a similar situation that were playing, a very competitive sort of scrimmage hockey. So he was relatively in game shape, and the deal was done really quickly. We had to make a slight adjustment on the housing because we only had Sawyer's shared apartment, but luckily one of the guys that had come over with a girlfriend had split up with her and was happy to move into his newfound best mate on the team. So, so it freed up. It just all worked like clockwork. It's just one of those things that I don't think you can replicate, where everything just fell into place. And I remember actually sending the contract and doing all the visa and everything, the work permit, at ladies' night on my phone in the middle. I might even have been comparing it that year. And, we're trying to keep this a big secret from everybody, and I've got, doing all these things on my phone while going on stage and doing the rest of it. And it was done really quickly. We flew him over and bang, straight he goes into the lineup against Nottingham, I think it was, up in the NIC.
Only good things happen on ladies' night then.
Ladies' night. The curse of ladies' night was the opposite that year. It was when our season got going, and it was a great group of guys that year, and everybody had fun, and it was as we'll go on to the sort of stories, that team did like to have drinks together, and it was a very social team, and that was one of our sparks.
I don't think we'll ever be able to do a ladies' night episode.
No, after hours,
So funny you mentioned Dundee, and that game where you found Weller, because the Devils lost that game 7-3, and they do not lose for a long, long time after that. The next week there's a 7-4 win against the Hull Stingrays, and then the wins just keep on coming all the way through November, December. When did it become a thing? When did the streak become something that the guys actively spoke about?
When you win a few games in a row, there's always that momentum and that feel-good factor, and guys start being a little more confident, and you see it when you're on a losing streak and guys are snatching at chances, and when you're on a winning streak everything seems to go naturally and the bounces go your way and everything. what we didn't realise at the time, and I think I spoke about this, or one of the guys did on the Matchka Q&A before, the night before, was that on our winning streak, a couple of the guys had decided to go to one of the local pubs Friday night before the game. So like, we're you know, really tense before the game. Let's just have a loosener. Let's just have a beer here and, you know, just chill out the night and see how the game goes. And then the game was our first win, so they're like, hey, that worked all right. So then the next Friday came and they told another couple of guys, and they're like, hey, we went for a beer on Friday. No, you're not meant to, but it worked, so you can't change a winning thing. And, you know, then it became like 2 beers, and then it was, you know, a group of 4 of them to a group of 6, and it grew. And then me and G knew nothing about it, absolutely whatsoever. And we found out probably 2 or 3 years later that was their thing, is that they had a Friday night get together. They'd have a few beers, and then they get themselves home nice and relaxed, and, you know, into the game and, you know, the winning streak. And I mean, one of the things from G and my point of view, one of the things that we always made a point of doing when we were on the streak is to not get complacent, and we always, before every game, reminded the team to think about how we got on this streak. What are the little things that we've been doing in the game? Let's not get complacent about those little things, because those little things add up. And, you know, as we know now with, you know, Andrew Lord's team and the details that he goes through, you know, it's all those minute details, those 1% things that, you know, that add up and make a big difference. And, you know, we always made a point of refreshing the guys, never to get complacent, you know, and to keep doing those little things that got us there.
I know Gaz is going to talk about one particular game that stands out, but there must be some moments in that streak. So there a couple for me. You mentioned the whole game when I think we won 10-1, 12-1 or something with Sam Smith.
12-0.
12-0.
It was live on Sky TV game. And that one does stand out. Like I say, most of the games over seasons, you know, without being reminded of them, just all sort of merge into one. But I remember that game that it was. I mean, Hull weren't the strongest team in the league, we know that, but they weren't that bad. But it was just one of those nights where we were phenomenal. And one of the things I meant to mention about, you know, the strength of this world record team was that on any given night, it could have been either line 1, 2, or 3 that was your game winner. And, you know, on that night, it happened to be that third line. So
I was going to ask you about that, because the other game that stands out to me is Coventry in the Big Blue 10. Which was an overtime winning goal when Ryan Finnerty kind of put the team on his back. I remember there was a breakaway going down against Stevie Lyle, and I almost looked across to you at the bench, because I think I was in block 14 at the time, and you were ducking down because you thought that was the moment the streak was going to end. I think Stevie Lyle saves it, and then a few minutes later Ryan Finnerty scored an overtime winner. Yeah,
I mean, it's an example of, you know, Finner, like you say, putting the team on his back and stepping up. And I mean, you think of those 3 lines that we had, and we said earlier that they were settled from day one to the end of the year. We had Pels, Matsker and Max, you know, what a line. Then we had Vother, Finner and Phil Hill, you know, all complementing each other, you know, and then the third line, then we had Stu McRae, Tylor Michel, who, you know, we brought back. We'd had him, you know, he was a revelation the year before. You know, you got him on your third line, and what a spark plug he is. You know, everybody still remembers Tylor Michel. Another player that would go out and make something happen, get the crowd on their feet. And then on that left wing, you had Sam Smith, who had just come back from the US, and Ben Davis, who was a young upcoming player. And we had them vying for that left winger spot, and it really was down to, you know, I think we started most games that season in rotating them. So Sam would play a shift, you go through the rotation, then it would be Ben. So they're playing every other shift on that line. And then every now and then, one of them would get hot, and they would stick for a few more games. And Sam got himself into a streak, and, you know, he developed this chemistry with Tyler and Stu. And, you know, that was probably his finest moment there. TV game, hat-trick, you know, beaming smiles. You know, he you know, what a game he had there.
I remember when we signed Stu McRae, and you kind of get excited, you get a look into his history, and I found a North American hockey forum for the team he had played for the previous year. There was a guy on there who said, "Thank goodness for that. I've never seen such a selfish hockey player in all my times." And then I think by November he was top of the assist chart, and Michelle and Sam Smith had rocketed in goals, and I just thought, Wow. The last time I do that.
Yeah, I read the same article as well. I was like, oh, I hope it's just a bitter fan here. The interesting thing about Stu McRae is I think he took a record 20 games to get off the mark in terms of his first goal. 20 games in. And I do remember Finner pulling me aside when we were on that mini losing streak early on in the season and saying, I don't think this guy's got it. I think we can do better, you know. And I was like, no, he's going to come good. You know, you look at his pedigree, he was... and it's funny how Stu McRae links back to so many other players that we've had in terms of sort of Cape Breton, St Francis Xavier University. So you look at, you know, Chris Culligan was almost identical. Joey Haddad played on some of the same junior teams. You've now got Stephen Dixon, who played on, you know, some of the teams over in Cape Breton, and you know, and they all know each other because everybody from that area does. But yeah, Stu McRae, you could see that he was a good player. You know, he wasn't yet seen a great player, and then, you know, the longer he goes on and doesn't score, you're thinking, oh, perhaps it's just not happening for him. But there was always something that you felt confident with him there. You know, he was very assured. And then, yeah, when he got going, I mean, you look at the stats for that year. I'm going to say he had, I mean, I probably have got it here if I search my phone, it's over 60 odd points on a third line. Back then, you know, the third line is your last line. It was very much the top two lines and then your third line. And, you know, that, just looking down here now, Stu McRae, I undersold him, didn't I? Yeah. 54 games, 78 points, including 52 assists from your third line is just ridiculous. Tylor Michel, 49 games, 62 points. And then Sam Smith, between him and Ben Davis, Sam 34 points and Ben Davis 11 points. You know, what a return that is from the third line that's meant to be your sort of holding line back then. And that just showed the depth we had, that, you know, if teams wanted to concentrate on the Matska line, or if they would try and handle the Finnerty, Voth and Hill line, that's fine, because then out steps Stu McRae, Tylor Michel and Sam Smith, Ben Davis, and game over.
Absolutely.
We're going to touch on one more player before I throw it to John. A couple of games that I know you have some big opinions on. Brad Voth, this year it was noticeable that his penalty minutes dropped significantly from previous
400 down to 200.
Pretty much, I think it was something like 342 the previous year to 194. He also didn't have the captaincy this year after an incident the year before, which I'm sure we'll cover in the future. But Brad Voth here really kind of getting his tools working as a player rather than someone who got himself in more than just a bit of bother here and there. Is that because the frustration wasn't there because we were winning games? Is that because that we had a better team around him? What is the secret behind Voth's kind of good behaviour?
I would say the success goes hand in hand with that, because I mean, still to this day we get people crying out for a Brad Voth type player that when things don't go our way, steams in, smashes somebody to bits. You know, it's Brad, to be fair, for every battle he could for the club, and, you know, he was always there to stick up for a teammate. You know, obviously sometimes that didn't go so well because of suspensions. You know, no doubt he was targeted within the league. I think a lot of people were scared of him, and, you know, every other team was happy when he was suspended. When you're winning 21, 22 games in a row, you're enjoying so much success, and we were dominating teams that, you know, you don't have those incidents that need him to step up. So, you know, he could get out to do something else he did really effectively, and that was as a player. You know, Brad Voth, the player, is a hell of a player. You know, for the size of him, he could skate, you know, superbly. He had a great hockey smart on him, great in front of the net, you know, quick wrist shot. You know, I think when you look back at Brad's record, the best hockey he always played was in the playoffs. I mean, I remember a goal he scored in Manchester from right on the right wing.
Belfast, he scored a winning goal.
He did to get us through to that was in the qualifier to get us through to the Final Four weekend. You know, he was a hell of a playoff player, but you know, when he wasn't having to do the police work that he had to do a lot of the time, because I think back then it's fair to say that we did get the rough end of the stick on a lot of calls, and the only answer that we had a lot of the time was for Vother to take justice into his own hands. And but when you're winning so many games, that you haven't got the need to do that. So he wasn't a stupid player by any means, and he wasn't going to upset something that we had going so well. So kept his head down and was playing good hockey.
Not just this season, but in general, because we hear a lot of talk about Andrew Lord and players that have come and gone. Did G have to police Brad Voth, or did he allow Brad Voth to make his own decisions? What was that relationship between coach and Brad Voth in terms of decision making during a game?
Yeah, I think G just let him play. Voth knew when he wanted to do it and when not to. That G and I never once told anybody ever to go out and fight, because we expected the players to go out and make that choice for the team. And there's one exception to that, and maybe it's one that we'll go into another game, and that's when we went into Belfast and they had McMorrow parading around, calling Vother out in the paper, and we were like, it's such a distraction, let's just get it out of the way, and it didn't go so well. So
yeah, we'll definitely cover that in many different forms in the future. Through this streak, John, there's two games I want to throw to you, both include the Sheffield Steelers. The first is a 3-2 victory in December. Now, I believe this is the night that the ice failed.
Yeah.
Ben Simon spent quite a lengthy amount of time.
Yes.
We'll find the ins and outs of what he was saying in a second from Franny. But to concentrate on that game from a perspective that I think you'll appreciate, that to me was the first time in a long time that Cardiff had a big league game. That felt like a big all-time league title deciding game.
Yeah, it did indeed. And if memory serves, I think Scott Matsker scored the game-winning goal that night in that 3-2 win. And I think it was just the confidence that was breeding that year, that Cardiff were winning in places or winning against teams that we didn't traditionally win against, such as going into the NIC, Craig Weller's first game, and then again after Christmas and winning there. And we beat Sheffield at home, and I know we're going to talk about an away game afterwards. So Cardiff, we were winning in places that we didn't traditionally win, and I think that goes down to, again, it was a real character team that year, starting from G and Franny, but again, I've talked about Finity, Scott Matsker, one of my favourite ever Devils players. Craig Weller had a huge impact on the team. Brad Voth, the former captain, who was a great role player. I think Phil Hill is hugely underrated. Yes, we've all talked about Phil, could he have thrown more checks and what have you. The number of big goals I think Phil Hill scored in his Cardiff Devils career, just arriving late with a one-timer or something like that, I think he was a leader in his own way. And then Franny has touched on Tylor Michel and what have you. So we were able to dig out results, and not even dig out results, win big games with style that perhaps we hadn't done for quite some time, which is what made that team so special.
Franny, what did Ben Simon have a problem with the ice for, and is it true he tried to get that game abandoned?
The biggest problem for Ben Simon is they were losing at the time. And then the ice in the BBT, as we try to explain to him, it's not state of the art here.
We like this next time you visit.
Yeah, this is what we play on. This is what we practice on every week, and maybe the guys' hands were so good is because we quite often had cones out in practice covering a big hole in the ice. So they were used to it. But there was a hole in the ice, and as much as the linesmen tried to freeze it up with the old CO2 spray and all that, it wasn't sort of patching up so well, and he was really keen to call it off, and it was a whisker away. I think there was phone calls being made to head of officials. I remember that the power forward they had that Vother fought early on in the season, Neil Clark. He had taken a hit, so he was like in the dressing room throwing up with a concussion or something. So he was a couple of guys down. Yeah. They're losing the game, and I think if you're winning that game, you never are going to get that try and get that called off. You just sort of play it out, and you accept the risk. But he was doing his best to get it called off, and it was very close to being called off. And I think they gave it just that little bit extra time for something to freeze, and the rink staff did a good job and got it to just about acceptable level. They got the ice to just about an acceptable level where there wasn't quite sand coming through onto the ice. They had a micro-millimetre of frozen water over the top of it, and we played on and we go through to win that game.
Who would have had the last call now? Andy French would have been in charge at this time?
I can't remember who was.
He was in charge of discipline at the time.
Yeah.
So I imagine he's going to have a...
Murray head of officiating at that time.
Yeah, I think it probably was Frenchy, and the referee was phoning in to see what to do, and I think the outcome was if there is sand, the sand bases on the ice, then it's dangerous. You can't play. If you can get something frozen over it, then the game goes on. And like I say, the rink staff came in and gave it that extra bit of squirt with the fire extinguisher, and then we managed to get the win and keep the streak going.
A month later, another Sheffield game, this time away from home, in the House of Steel, and a game which I will freely admit at the time had me planning my end of season celebration party. Cardiff Devils beat the Sheffield Steelers 7-1 in the House of Steel in January to continue the streak. John, bit of plane, trains and automobiles for you.
Yeah.
But did you, as well as me, think that was the game that had started the title procession?
I thought Sheffield fans thought that. I remember waiting for the bus after the game, a Sheffield fan saying, "You've got it this year." And at that point, I really did start to believe. So I think the club had done a great job putting on a couple of coaches to go to Sheffield. It was a midweek game, but the team wanted some support. But one of the coaches sort of broke down, and we were stuck at Tamworth services. So myself and Glenn, who's a well-known Devils fan, and my partner at the time, and a few others jumped in a taxi and paid sort of 60 quid to get from Tamworth to Sheffield just in time for face-off, and completely worth it. The first period alone, I remember Craig Weller scoring with a bullet. I remember G scoring a lovely goal. I think John Pele scored one on the back door, and it was around about 4-0 at the end of the first period, and the Steelers were shell-shocked, and we just didn't let up the whole game. And it wasn't a live Sky game, but it was the main game on the highlight show. And I remember David Sims and Rick Strachan were there. And before the game, I think they previewed. They thought Sheffield were going to win. And then afterwards, and don't get me wrong, I got on very well with David Sims, but it was kind of, you could see the shock in his eyes where he had to talk about how magical Cardiff were that night. And 7-1 win against Sheffield, where we did completely outplay them. And you're talking 16, 17 games to go, but what must have been so frustrating for the guys, and I don't know whether Franny wants to talk about this, we were on that winning streak, but yet we were never 7 points clear or 8 points clear or 10 points clear. We were winning all these games, and yet we never opened up a gap of more than sort of 3 or 4 points. So that must have been frustrating, I guess.
Yeah, I don't even think we were leading we might have been leading, but there was always two teams that there was Sheffield and Belfast that were right there with us, and just when we thought, well, with this many games in the bag, we must have opened up a lead by now. You looked and it was tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But going back to that Sheffield game, it was probably one of the most dominant performance against your biggest rival in modern times, and it was one of those magical nights where our possession must have been upwards of 80%. It was relentless. It was phenomenal. That first period, it was just going bang, 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 goal, 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 and the arena was deadly silent. And I think my dad was actually on the coach that broke down with you too, and they arrived. They didn't take the taxi. They cheaped out and they waited for the cavalry to arrive, and they got there at the end of the first period, and could not believe the score. And what a period to miss. That was one of the finest periods I've seen.
Was it that game Jeff Legui got thrown out? Was it Jeff Legui or something, or throwing a glove, or there was? You could just tell there was so much frustration in that building that night. As Franny said, it was definitely quiet apart from the Cardiff fans who had made the trip, and I remember Kenton Smith scoring a goal and what have you, and when that buzzer went, and it wasn't just the score, it was the fact that the Devils had been so dominant and looked by far the best team in the league. Now, guys, I was with you. I thought that was the night we'd broken the hoodoo and we'd go on to claim that title.
Just like to point out, the best thing I broke down when I ran away travel, I always got you there and back.
You did.
You know,
But we never beat Sheffield. So
we never beat Sheffield. No,
swings and roundabouts.
We definitely didn't. Those damned Dundee Stars. Before the streak started, it was a loss to the Dundee Stars, 7-3, up in their building. And it is the Dundee Stars that break the streak on the 16th of January in a shootout. Not many fans are going to be there. It's a Sunday evening.
I was just going to say, it wasn't just Dundee Stars that broke the heart, wasn't it? Ex-Devils.
It was Jayla Tulip, yeah. It was Jayla Tulip.
I mean, really, couldn't you have just had a quiet word before he takes off?
I think right now Jay's gutted about that. Really, because, he's a huge Devils fan, and whenever I speak to him or message him or whatever, he still talks about that penalty shootout loss. That was a heartbreaker when he was on the team, and he's delighted that things are going so well in Cardiff, and ironically it was him that broke the streak and ultimately ended what we thought was going to be the first league title in ages. I mean, got to point out, not as an excuse, but back then we weren't as fortunate as we are now. I mean, that was a bus trip to Dundee, so if it was a Sunday night we would have played on Saturday. We'd have been
just the Saturday game is actually that Ryan finished
that
the overtime
goal,
winner against Coventry, so high emotion. You've gone through overtime,
tough
battled
game,
5-4,
and then you're up at probably 5 in the morning, jumping on a bus at 6, arriving there 2.25 hours before face off, and Dundee is the longest trip in Scotland as well, so it's not just going up to Edinburgh, Glasgow, or whatever, but that extra whatever it is, hour or two to Dundee, and I always used to have a wry smile when I'd hear other teams moaning about travel when they had to travel from sort of mid areas of the country all the way to Dundee, and you try banging another 5 hours on top of that, then you know what travel problems are. But yeah, I mean, we didn't fare very well in Dundee at all.
Had you started, because this is a question that guys, myself, Aled used to ask Andrew Lord, and he was great at putting the bluff face on. Had you and G started talking about the title at this stage? Was it, we'd had so much bad luck, and we were never supposed to win it because we played in the big blue tens and Sheffield, Belfast, and what have you. Had you guys allowed yourself to think about winning the title?
I don't think we consciously did, or we didn't admit it to each other anyway, so we never had open conversations about it, but probably in our heads, and certainly in my head, it was this is going so well. Up until that Dundee game, I honestly felt, and I'm sure the players felt the same, that we were never going to lose a game because we felt absolutely bulletproof, and this is where G and I had to keep reminding to do all those things and not get complacent. But we would arrive at buildings knowing that we were going to win, and it just showed in the performances. The confidence was through the roof, and anyone that's ever played sport at whatever level knows it's so much down to confidence. We've seen it recently with a team that was playing with confidence, absolute joy to watch, and then when that confidence goes for whatever reason, and it can be little silly things that cause the confidence to go, a couple of bad plays or a few crossbars here and there, and it makes such a difference in the team. But everybody was brimming with confidence, and I do remember thinking, I don't see how possibly we can lose another game. But we go to Dundee, we get into the shootout, even in the shootout, because not all the games had been sort of 7-1 wins. We had, like you say, the night before, one in overtime, and you just, when things are going your way, they're going your way, so you get that overtime break, and you mentioned earlier about it looks like it's a goal to break it, big save from Stevie Lyle, and then that pops Finner on the breakaway, and even in that shootout, okay, but we got this because that's what we're doing, we're winning games, and it's going to be a little bit of a close one, and we can laugh about it after the game, and we got it, but on that night it didn't work that way.
Well, you win the next 3, 4-0 against Braehead, 3-1 against the Hull Stingrays, 13-2 against the Edinburgh Capitals. Wow, that's got to still be a record. There are a couple of losses sprinkled in and around that, but it's this February stretch, which for me is where it was lost. John, I know you feel maybe the beginning of the season as well.
Yeah.
Attributed to it, which it obviously did. But these 3 losses from the 19th of Feb to the 26th, losing to Sheffield twice, crucially, and Braehead, coincide with Tylor Michel being suspended, which Gerad Adams described as immense frustration, and he actually outwardly said he had a lack of respect for the league for the way that they handled the suspension of Tylor Michel around this time. Franny, and obviously with G speaking so passionately or publicly, must have been something that got in the room as well.
Yeah, it's the Tylor Michel suspension. I don't want to be too controversial, but it's still talked about as the most ridiculous suspension, and that and some of the Brad Voth ones were overly harsh.
Is it more ridiculous that Clarkson being suspended for his reflection?
For the
reflection,
yeah.
That's still my number one.
Yeah, but same team, same GM. I remember the incident. It was Dan Welsh. Dan Welsh, submarine hits Max Beerbreyer. Max is down on the floor. We knew before Max had come to us he'd had, a really bad ACL injury which ended his North American career. He's down on the floor. I think one of our players tries to go for Welsh, and linesmen jump in or defensemen jump in or whatever. And this is, we talked about Votha being more controlled when when we were on the streak. We've lost a few games now, and there's maybe a little bit of pressure's built up because that feeling that we're never going to lose a game is gone. Our invincibility shield is gone. We felt maybe a little vulnerable. So in the next face-off, I remember it clearly now. Tylor lines up against Dan Welsh, and as soon as the puck is dropped, he drops his gloves, he pushes him, and Dan Welsh turns towards him, and he no choices him into a fight. So yes, Tylor Michel is the instigator of the fight. It's not a sucker punch. He says let's go. He gives him a little cross check. He gives him a little shove. The gloves come off. Dan Welsh knows it's coming. They start fighting. Dan Welsh even throws a punch back and catches Tylor with one, but Tylor ends up throwing some quick ones, and Welsh goes down, and he gets thrown out of the game. And I remember thinking at the time, being thrown out of the game, what a ludicrous call that was, because it was nothing more than an instigation. It's kind of the reaction that you like to see when one of your teammates has been injured with a cheap shot. I'd rather somebody instigate a fight with me any day of the week over submarine hit to my knees. And Tylor Michel steps up for his team. Had we still been on the streak, I don't think that would happen, because I think we would have risen above it. But by that time, I think pressure was beginning to tell. That's probably when guys are starting to realise that it's not quite as clean cut as we thought it was, and maybe that was the reason. But still, I don't really blame Tylor for that play. I think he sought to give a bit of justice to Dan Welsh in the way that he probably should have been thrown out for a submarine hit. And it's I remember getting called into the referee's room, because obviously things on the ice were quite tense, and you've got Doug Christian in there saying that's a Bertuzzi hit. Now the incident he's referring to is when Todd Bertuzzi sucker punches, can't remember the guy, Steve Moore from behind. Steve Moore drops to the ice and breaks his neck, I think, and Bertuzzi jumps on him and still throwing punches when he's knocked out on the floor. Now that is what he's sowed in the mind, and that is obviously where the referee report kind of stuck with it. I don't think I dealt with it as well as I should have, because instead of calling out Christensen, and maybe calmly explaining, hang on, this is what Bertuzzi did. This is what I was so frustrated at at the call for a start that he's been thrown out, let alone that somebody is talking about Bertuzzi, you know. And it got into an argument in that room, and maybe that wasn't the best thing to do, and something that I regret. But still, you know, that incident was then reviewed by the league, and at the end of it, Tylor Michel gets a 5-game ban. Now, every time that there was an incident after that where we tried to compare the two, the response was always, yeah, but you can't use that incident because what, you know? Because it's so far out of reality that that you could never use that as a yardstick. So that just shows it was a horrendous call. I think another incident that hurt us at the time was that a young Ben Davis got very frustrated and I think scared, to be honest, about the lack of ice time he was getting, and thought that his career was going to disappear down the pan, and instead of being patient and waiting for his opportunity to jump back into the lineup, because there's always opportunities, you know. I had a career of sort of sitting there patiently waiting for some ice time, and I always got to play plenty enough during the year. And we'd explain that to Ben, your chance will come, it's just Sam Smith's on fire, we can't sit him down, you know. So I think Ben had panicked a bit as a young guy and, you know, inexperienced guy, and he moves to Basingstoke in the EPL, and, you know, he would have been a great replacement for those 5 games for Tylor Michel, and would have sort of lessened the impact of that, but we didn't have that. So all of a sudden, you know, we're a key guy down, one of those spark plug guys down, and, you know, without a straight replacement for him. And
just to give some context to those Sheffield games you mentioned, because I remember saying to Shannon before that weekend, when we knew Tylor Michel, would you be happy at splitting the series? And he said, yeah, I'd be happy at splitting the series. And I remember that home game, the one where Mark Thomas scores the overtime winner for Sheffield. We were leading 3-2 or thoughts of going into the third period, but Mark Smith had taken a hit and couldn't take ice time, and they got it back and they won in overtime. And then the next night we had Michel out already. I think Sam Smith was maybe ill or sick or something. Mark Smith was then out with the injury from the Saturday night, and I think Max had to drop back and play D, and we were never in the game. But I always look back at that overtime, that Mark Thomas overtime winner, and think maybe if Mark Smith hadn't taken that hit or what have you, if we'd have just split that series that weekend, I still think we would have gone on and won the league title.
Well, I mean, there is a loss after that weekend against Greyhead, but after that, there's 8 straight wins to finish the league. So, you know, there's another little mini streak that occurs. Something I guess we'll touch upon delicately, I suppose, is that during this campaign, Bob Phillips, after falling out with everyone in the off-season, relinquishes control of the Sheffield Steelers, and Paul Reagan, who's the current owner of the Carl Devils, buys it. John, as fans, this is the second time that we experienced our owner buying our greatest rivals. How are you feeling in the stands around the time that happened?
Well, I guess there's kind of the big picture, and then there's the Cardiff Devils fan who wants to win their first league title since 96-97. Thankfully we've done that now. And I buy into this. The league does need Sheffield and stable teams and what have you. So I could see the fact that somebody kept Sheffield in and also if we wanted to win the league title this year, I didn't want Sheffield to be able to say it was because we were docked points or we lost players and therefore you won it. I wanted to beat them outright, and I'm sure Franny's emotions were 10 times mine, but I wanted to beat them outright. So whilst I wasn't comfortable, I wanted to beat them on even terms, and I think the league probably does need Sheffield as much as it sticks in my throat. So, but this was such a, we didn't know the Todd Kelman years were coming and the Steve King years, and it had been such a long wait since 96-97. I didn't know, and as much as I had faith in Franny and Gene, what have you, I didn't know when there was going to be a chance to win a league title again. And anything that kind of muddied the waters that year, the Tylor Michel suspension, so on and so forth, and this, it just felt like the odds were stacked against us a little bit. Yeah,
and Franny, I guess I think John summed it up fantastically there. Just, I guess my only question to you on this part of the subject is, was it a big topic in the dressing room, or because it was kind of off ice, I guess you didn't, I guess you don't, day-to-day training, don't see the owners particularly, did it have that much of an effect really on what you were doing or what you were concentrating on, you and G?
I tell you what didn't go down well is when we saw the emergence of the famous half and half Sheffield and Cardiff shirt. That's not really what you want to see when you're going head to head with your closest rivals. I think the frustrating thing for me as part of the off-ice staff was that obviously when Sheffield was taken over, we had access to the business side of them, and they were losing an absolute fortune, and they were spending an absolute fortune more than us in players as well. People would not believe how little that world record team cost, comparatively in the league. I would say, I'm not going to put figures on it, but we knew exactly how much Sheffield was spending. We knew how much we were spending. Normally what happens if somebody rescues a business is, you cut your cloth accordingly. Yes. So we were expecting some changes. I don't know if they made any signings after that point. I can't remember. But if anything, we thought, well, hang on, this is a club that was, heading towards liquidation before it got saved. It was, it was on the brink before, the new ownership. So the minimum is that you would expect is that you're going to try and make that business solvent and not have it sort of almost subsidised by your own team. And that was a bit bitter in terms of knowing what the different spend level was that continued then right on in the season. But even then, I don't think it was a distraction that cost us the league at all, because we were, we'd beaten them on the ice, with that, size difference in the pay packets, and we were confident that we could, go on and do it. So I don't think it had. I think it was a frustration. It was frowned upon, but I don't think it impacted performances.
The only bit I found galling, and I don't want to touch on a touchy subject here because there's obviously politics that go involved with Cardiff Devils, but when Paul Regan went on the ice and celebrated the league win in Sheffield, I must admit that stuck in the throat. And I'm not going to try and rewrite history. I tried to be involved with the supporters, working with Paul Regan, and I didn't openly criticise Paul. And Paul's always been okay with me. So I don't want to rewrite history like I think he's this big anti person. But it was a little bit galling, I thought, when having only owned the club for 2 to 3 weeks, he went on the ice and celebrated that league title.
Especially because the league hadn't been decided on the last day.
Yes.
That the Devils could have won the league. Yes. It was still, if Sheffield had lost that night, the Devils would have been crowned champions. And I guess if you own two teams, that's a delicate sort of sounding board.
I got to talk about my travel arrangements that weekend, guys, as well, because
you had a very bad travel time.
I've always had bad travel times, but my ex-girlfriend, who I still hold in very high regard, I'm not with now, but she knew how much the league title meant to me, and I think we played Coventry on the Saturday night and won that game, and we went to Edinburgh on the Sunday, and I'd always said whatever happened, I needed to be where the Devils won the league title. So to be very, very fair to her, she organised it. We after the Coventry game on the Sunday morning, got up early, drove to Bristol Airport, flew up to Edinburgh to watch this game, and the Devils won. I remember Tim Burrows had a good game and what have you, but you just kept looking at the phone and seeing the score coming through from Sheffield. And I remember in Edinburgh, you sit right behind the away bench. And I remember actually, Franny and myself didn't know each other particularly well at that time, but I remember I was just sitting behind it, and kind of when that buzzer went, and the Devils had won, and they'd had such a fantastic season, but I could almost see the look in Franny's eyes of, 7-8 months hard work, and yes, we've got the world record, but again, you play for the biggest prize, and the Devils had missed out by a nose hair, and that was a pretty horrible night in Murrayfield.
Yeah, it's with all those wins, and then it still came down not just to the first tiebreaker, was it? It wasn't goal difference that could separate the two teams. It wasn't something. It was regulation wins, I think it was. Where we were ahead on regulation. We had less regulation losses. Mm-hmm. We had less regulation wins. It was something weird like that. It just so happens that, you've got to have a winner, haven't you?
Yeah.
At some point, and you've got to have your criteria, and that criteria is set out. And that's how close it was. I believe Belfast only finished a point behind the two of us.
Yeah, Sheffield beat them on a Thursday night, I think. Jason Hewitt scored to knock them out finally. But
yeah, so they were a point away from the league title and finished in third place.
Yeah,
it just shows how ridiculous it was that year.
But it's the just to finish on this, for me, I'm a big believer, I guess, in the old football adage that the table never lies. I actually think the table did kind of lie that year. I genuinely think over the course of the whole season, the Cardiff Devils were the best team in the league that year.
Well, the history will say different, unfortunately, for all of us sat around this table. Just a few loose ends from the season. More playoff heartache. In fact, it wasn't until this past April that all that playoff heartache was put to bed. Just a last little rumour, and a little sort of things to tidy up in terms of things you hear. Had Ryan Finnick signed for Coventry by the time that playoff final had been played? I remember on Sky Sports, David Sims had quite proudly pronounced that a member of the Cardiff Devils had already signed elsewhere, and the rumour, the scuttlebutt in the block behind the goal that day was that Ryan Finnick had already signed in Coventry. Was that true?
I think it was, yeah. I think that was the plan to go there. He'd had 2 years with us, and for whatever reason, I think he'd been promised maybe an even bigger role on Coventry, but then he ended up with the coaching job in Sheffield. So Coventry let him out of the pre-contract or whatever that was signed, and had moved on. But going back to the playoffs. We've obviously had the absolute heartache of, going that far and doing so well, and, almost having, the league snatched away from us, the 5-game suspension still in the back of your mind, and, just one more point during those 5 games would have done it, and all that kind of stuff, and the Brayhead not showing up for that final weekend. So, the best way to make amends was, to win the playoffs, and then we'll have something to show for it, and be the last team celebrating on the ice, and it was all going well, wasn't it? In that playoff final, it was very well. It was going very, very well. I remember the Finity, Hill, and Voth line was absolutely on fire. Votha gets one, Finner gets one.
When Finity put us 3-1 up, I thought we'd won. Yeah.
And then I think we came out for the third period, and they get one almost straight away. I forget the guy's name. He just sort of cut us like a knife through butter and go in there, and it was just like watching slow motion where nothing happened, and then I think the deciding goal was Beauregard.
I think it was a wrap-around. Did Stevie drop his stick?
Stevie had his stick knocked out of his hand by Mark Smith. Now Mark Smith, we haven't even talked about Mark Smith. What an underrated player he was. Probably made as many saves as Stevie during that year. I remember watching him some games coming off, effing and blinding, and shaking his hand, arm, head, whatever he'd blocked the shot with, but he'd go out and do exactly the same next shift, and he gets a little bit too close to Stevie, and he bumps the stick out of his hand. I think as well, G, who barely put a foot wrong when he played, fell for one of their players calling for the puck, so G went behind the net and reversed it straight to one of the Nottingham guys. Beauregard steps out and wraps it around. Stevie's got no stick, and that's the game winner. And for the second time in a few weeks, now it's double heartbreak.
That was. I'm ashamed, proud to say, I don't know. I think that's the last time I cried, guys. After driving home, just because to sum up the whole season, when it's not like now the Devils weren't one of the big teams. So for G and Franny to do such a great job and to be almost there, but to lose out on the last nick on both occasions. Even someone as stone-hearted as me, I was pretty hurt on the way home.
Well, I must admit that I think it's 8 years. The Elite League had been around at this point, and this was the first year I stormed out before the presentation. I left whoever I was with at the time, as a group of us, and I went back to the hotel to compose myself an evening. But look, we don't want to end on a downer, because Certainly when we had the match a couple of seasons ago and the team got back together, I think it was plain to see just how special a group that was. And I still maintain they probably could have given the Devils a run for their money that year to a league championship as well. They still looked every bit. It's sad that a lot of guys retiring far too soon. So I guess what I'd like to end on, and this is a question for both of you. We'll throw it out. What is the legacy of the record breakers?
I think at the time that Guinness World Record, which we did get confirmed after, it didn't feel like much of a prize at the time, because when you look in the record books in terms of our league, we weren't the league champions, we weren't the playoff champions. But now, when the dust settles, yes, it still hurts, but obviously, the club's gone on to great things now. I think every single player that was involved in that year, and every single sort of member of staff, is proud of that world record. I mean, it's a world record.
It is.
I think we thought the next year that Norfolk Admirals in the AHL had beaten it, because they went on some crazy run that. But it's still not in the world records, because it was some playoff games were involved in that, where ours was a league only streak. I think that world record is something everyone can be proud of, and hey, everyone on that team can say that they were a world record holder, which not many people can say. So as time goes on, that comfort grows, and my lasting memory of that team will indeed be the Matska, the Matchka game, where everybody bar, Ben Davis couldn't get out of, he'd just gone to North America to crack it, so, obviously that was impossible for him to come, but, for all those guys to come in and fly in and, on their own expense and, to do something like that for Scott, I just think, that is the legacy of that team.
For me, I would echo everything Franny said there. For me, it was a real... And I do thank Franny and G for this. It was a shot in the arm when we needed it, and it took a few years to come to fruition, that we could compete again. I was kind of worried, and this is going to sound extremely snobbish, that we were turning into a Basingstoke or something like that, where we were always going to be mid-table, maybe below that in the Elite League. And I'm sure as these podcasts go on, I'm going to bore people with the stories of how... I grew up when with Franny playing, and the Devils dominated British ice hockey, and my expectation of the Devils every season, even during the bad times, was to compete for a league title, and it really hurt that we weren't doing that. And I think, and I'm not turning this to an old fans, new fans thing, but there are a lot of new fans who maybe at that time had never experienced the Devils competing for anything, and I think it was just a nice shot in the arm to say, no, this club is still based on winning, and this club sets standards, and that world record does sit there in the record books for that. And for me, just personally, it was a reassurance that maybe not that year, and it was heartbreaking, but one day I'd see my club lift the league title again.
Yeah, and I think that the pride for me and G is that we know what budget that was done on. There was all kind of rumours on the stupid money that we'd given to Craig Weller. Now, I physically typed out his contract, and he wasn't the top earner on our team, and our team weren't anywhere near the top earners on other teams. I know how much we spent to the penny, and I know how much other teams spent to the penny, and it was significantly lower. And when you think of what we did achieve during that time, that makes me proud and G proud of. We definitely punched above our weight during that period, and it's something for us to look back on, with a smile, and it just, is frustrating that it's not in the record books as a trophy.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. That is the 10-11 record-breaking season. We laughed, we cried, and we're still annoyed about the suspension.
Oh yeah.
That's all this time.
But we're world record holders.
Thank you very much for joining us, guys. I guess I'd like to do some more of these. I think it'll be interesting to maybe go back in time a little bit further and
Test John's memory bank.
Yeah. Get more beer in for Franny next time.
We'll make sure that, and maybe those figures maybe come out a little bit more in future episodes. But I think what we'll probably do is get a poll on Twitter with a few topics and see what people want to hear.
Okay.
So I guess we'll have a discussion about that. But gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining me. And until we jump in our time machine again, I'm Gareth Hewish, and on behalf of John Donovan and Neil Francis, thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.